Shalom. My name is Christopher Wolf, and I am National Chair of the Civil Rights Committee of the Anti-Defamation League. And I'm also an internet lawyer who has been working on the problem of anti-Semitism online for almost 20 years. So I am pleased to moderate this plenary panel reporting on the work of the Internet Task Force of the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Combating Antisemitism. Today, I and my co-chair of the task force, Speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, have issued a report on the work of the ICCA Internet Task Force, and copies are available to you here today. So 1 year ago, the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Combating Anti-Semitism Task Force on Internet Hate met in California in the United States at Stanford University, and also that day at the corporate headquarters of Facebook, and established a permanent anti-cyber hate working group to probe the roots of the problem of hate speech on the Internet and to agree on realistic procedures to tackle the issue. The goal of the working group was to include Internet industry leaders, including Google and Facebook, eBay, Microsoft, Yahoo, Twitter, and others, to maintain a continuing dialogue with parliamentarians and experts on best practices on how to combat anti-Semitism online and all kinds of Internet hate, and to promote transparency on how online hate is addressed. You will hear today how the ICCA task force and the resulting working group can serve as a model for continuing effective action against anti-Semitism. I am joined on the panel by my colleague and ADL professional, Robert Trestan, who has been instrumental in implementing the goals of the ICCA Internet Task Force of the working group. I'm also joined by my great friend and member of the UK Parliament, John Mann, who is co-founder and chairman of the ICCA. John has been a remarkable ally in the fight against anti-Semitism and has recruited members of Parliament around the world to join in the fight. John is, in my view, a true hero in the fight against modern anti-Semitism. Fiamma Nirenstein is well known to everyone here. She is a former member of the Italian Parliament. She is a prominent journalist and expert on Middle East terrorism and anti-Semitism. She is a founder of the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Combating Antisemitism, and she very recently made Aliyah. Fiamma, we appreciate your willingness to share a few minutes of opening comments with us, following which we will turn to the panel. Fiamma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be in such a wonderful company with my friends here. And I'm not going to speak about the task force. I want to tell you that my main task now is to be very quick. This is what they asked for me, and this is what I'm going to try to do. I want to tell you how important the Inter-Parliamentary Coalition for Combating Antisemitism is. You know, you must not think that it is easy to put the subject of anti-Semitism in the middle of a discussion of a parliament or of several parliaments altogether, because it goes completely against the substrate of what is today, since the end of the Second World War, intended to be a democratic parliament, a democratic institution. Nobody expected anti-Semitism to become such an important issue. Nobody thought that inside the parliament themselves we would have to stand in front of real anti-Semites, as it has happened in these last years. Nobody thought that the elites of the world should have stood and say, Look at this. This is real anti-Semitism, exactly the kind that you thought that would never raise again after the Second World War. And you know, when it comes from a parliament, when it comes from a coalition of parliaments, it's very important because it becomes laws, it becomes interrogations, it becomes statements, it becomes books, as the two here, that I hope you will be able to see, that is the final document of the subcommittee of inquiry into anti-Semitism. You know, here it's stated once and for all by the Italian Parliament in its most bipartisan way not only that anti-Semitism exists, but that it is nowadays so much alive and kicking and threatening, first of all, Europe, threatening to take it back to years that we even thought that we should never have to remember again. And here they are again. The fact that inside the parliament, like in Hungary, in Greece, and nowadays also in Italy with this new party of Beppe Grillo, we have people that stand up and speak against Israel, but not with the so-called legitimate criticism against the state, but accusing it of being an apartheid state, accusing it with several blood libels that you all know, and I will not go back to it because you are discussing this in all of your groups, but you know what it means. It means that to counteract this, you have, first of all, to convince the world that anti-Semitism exists, because the first thing that happened has been a terrible denial, mostly from the elite in the institution, because the institution themselves could not admit that the United Nations or the European Union, that they have automatic majority voting for anti-Semitic proposals. This was something completely unattainable. So for me, being part since the very beginning of the ICCA, of its steering committee, and finding myself in its very many important initiatives, when I was for the first time organized by John Mann in the magnificent large inaugural conference in London, in the main cradle of democracy, and we were there so many coming from all over the world, I felt suddenly that we can do something, that we can really fight together. And then from there we had the Declaration of London, and then we had the protocol in Montreal, and then we had in Rome a meeting of the steering committee that really impressed very much the institution of my country, for instance, as I'm sure that in London, in Montreal, all over the world, the institution, the representative of the parliaments, of the government, were really asking themselves, what's happening here? What is all of this crowd of parliamentary members that are coming to us to ask us to combat anti-Semitism? Look, it has been an outstanding phenomenon. It has been something that has been growing all over the years until we have become really a body that was also able to give birth, and you will hear about it now, to this task force that is now discussing one of the most difficult phenomena of our time, which is anti-Semitism, and not only anti-Semitism, racism and discrimination online. I will go back to this if I will have time to participate in the panel. So I know that my 5 minutes are through. Is it? Yeah.
That's a perfect introduction.
And I just want to tell you that you will hear today, in particular, about this outstanding activity, which is the task force. Because we thought that this is today the most important activity of the ICCA, but still we will continue working, trying to propose best practice, which include all the political parties in the parliament, try to conquer them to what is our main task today, to fight for democracy and to fight against every discrimination. Because, and with this I finish, go and see where discrimination against women is, where is sexual discrimination against homosexuals is, go and see where discrimination against opposition members is, and there you will find anti-Semitism. So the fight for democracy, which can be shared by all the political forces, is always a fight against anti-Semitism. And this is why I trust that we can make everybody join with us, Jews, Christians, Muslims in good faith, and we will fight together this terrible phenomena that we are all together here to fight.
Excellent. Perfect. John Mann, can we hear from you?
Jews, Christians, Muslims, also atheists will join the fight. First, though, I just wanted to abuse my position and pay tribute to Fiamma, a tremendous gain for Israel. But what a loss to the Parliament of Italy. But I have a little announcement. There is no loss to the ICCA because today we are appointing 2 honorary vice presidents. Fiamma will be honorary vice president and therefore remain involved at the highest level. And Gert Weisskirchen, retired from the German Bundestag, will become our 2nd honorary vice president and again remain involved. Since this last global forum, we have had some successes. One success, the creation of a group following a conference in Brussels in the European Parliament. It sounds rather small, but it took some years to get the right people together across the political spectrum, across the nations that make up the European Union. But we have achieved this with an effective, active group in the heart of the European Union, in the Parliament. And the principles that we have used are the same principles that underpin the ICCA. First, we work across all legitimate political parties, and we work to ensure the involvement of all legitimate political parties. That we have achieved at the European level in the European Parliament. Secondly, we work alongside and with, in unison, our friends in the Jewish community, and in this case we have 3 organisations specifically assisting the work in the European Parliament: B'nai B'rith, the European Jewish Congress, and SEJI. And that is a principle, and it is a principle not to tick a box. It is a principle to ensure effective working, so that we politicians are forced to do our work, but do so from an informed basis in cooperation and not at a distance. We have other successes in the last 3 weeks. The Prime Minister of Australia has signed the London Declaration. The Leader of the Opposition in Australia, over 200 senior politicians in Australia have signed the London Declaration, and we are now looking for other countries, for other leaders, for other parliamentarians to join the many who have signed up to that declaration already. And as well, in the UK, and this will be available in the autumn, a high-level committee looking at protocols for dealing with hatred, and specifically race hatred, including explicitly anti-Semitism in behaviour in elections. A crucial piece of work, which again I think will be leading in providing a formula that could be used in my country, but could be shared in other countries. This working group is a model of how we work, this working group that we are hearing from today, because the same principles apply that go through all our work in the ICCA. Number one, outcomes. We are not prepared to do anything just to sit at the table, to smile, to look good, to achieve nothing. There must be outcomes, critical for any working group. not process. Process destroys by ensuring that everyone looks inward. Principle number 2. This working group has succeeded because it's looked outward, not inward. Not just talking to ourselves, but talking to others who might criticise our approach initially, to ensure that the dialogue takes place. Principle number 2, looking outward. And the third and final principle of the 3, partnership. Number 1, outcome. Number 2, looking outward. Number 3, partnership. And here, 2 key partners. 1, the ADL, bringing incredible expertise and access, but the expertise in particular unrivaled across the world when it comes to issues relating to the internet. An unrivaled expertise, and therefore a real partnership, allowing us to give space to the experts to take forward the issue. And second partner, as you will hear in a minute, the industry itself. Because sometimes we as politicians need to think how others, not us, can solve the problems that we look at. Because if every problem has to be solved by us, then we will spend all our time sat in committees attempting to legislate, usually on issues on which we have no or little expertise. That is not the approach the ICCA has taken. That is why this working group has succeeded. And for those who ask, why do we do it? Well, the answer is very, very simple. And I've said it before, but let me repeat it to finish. Why do we do this work? Why does Gert do this work? Why does Petra Bauer from Austria, who's a new member of the ICCA International Committee, why does she give her time to do this work? Why do many politicians across the world do this? Because for some of us, there are no votes. No votes in this. I tell you why we do this work. We do it because we are the elected political leaders. And if we refuse to do this work, if we fail to do this work, if we're incapable of doing this work in expert partnership with those who know what they're talking about, such as Christopher, such as Robert, then we fail ourselves and we fail our countries. And I ask you, wherever you're from, go back to your politicians and purely ask them, will they do their little bit, their tiny bit to assist? Because we ask no more. Every politician elected at any national level in any parliament should do their little bit, and we will attempt to assist them in doing so through the ICCA. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. You mentioned 3 principles. There is a 4th that I will take away from this, and that is when speaking at a conference, never, ever follow Fiamma or John. But I have to, so I will do my best. And what I'd like to do is tell you about the work of the ICCA Internet Task Force and the resulting working group, give you some context, and give you what I hope will be perhaps an example, as John says, that might be followed around the world, not just with respect to Internet hate speech, but for all aspects of fighting anti-Semitism. So when I was asked to chair the ICCA Task Force by John and by the ICCA, excuse me, along with Julie Edelstein, we knew that we had a unique opportunity to assemble a cross-section of people who could make a real difference in the fight against Internet hate. And we included members of Parliament from around the world. We selected experts on anti-Semitism and other forms of hate and hate speech. We invited scholars and representatives of Internet businesses. We had leaders of NGOs, and our desire was to create a multi-stakeholder group not the traditional combatants against anti-Semitism, frankly, that ultimately would take action and continue to act in tangible ways, as John said, with real work product, real resulting efforts and results. So we resolved not just to talk about online hate, not just to point fingers at the places where online hate is happening, but to do something that we really thought could have an impact in reducing the appearance of online anti-Semitism, in promoting counter-speech to refute the lies of anti-Semitism, in fostering education of young people so that they can filter those lies of anti-Semitism, and importantly, to get the gatekeepers of the internet, the Facebooks and the Googles of the world, to get them to come to the table and join in the fight against internet hate. So our idea was to have a group that would work in parallel with this Global Forum's working group on internet hate and with others who share our concerns. And we believe that with multiple groups and multiple approaches, and they're not all the same, that new ideas and new approaches might emerge, and together we can make a difference. So in October of 2011, in the Houses of Parliament in London, thanks to John's arrangements, our task force took evidence from witnesses and experts around the world on the type of proliferating hate that's appearing on the internet, the various online media through which it's appearing, and the regional characteristics of hate and anti-Semitism online. And the hearing also dramatically highlighted the impact that internet hate can have, including its role in precipitating real-world violence. The task force received a voluminous written record on the scope of internet hate, and we saw vividly how extremists have found the internet to be a boon to their warped causes. Anti-Semites have set up websites, they post videos, they manage online stores selling recordings and clothing, and more. They use social media to communicate with each other and to recruit and to mislead. They bolster their fellow haters, and they indoctrinate new generations of anti-Semites. The internet is a tool that Hitler and the Nazis could never possibly have imagined. And we found virulent anti-Semitism even in places where you wouldn't expect it to appear, in the comment sections to your daily newspaper online. The task force saw that the perniciousness of anti-Semitism on today's internet is that the more that one sees it, the more one is likely to consider it normal and acceptable. Good people are just numbed by the proliferation and daunted by the task of responding. Others consider it a reflection, frankly, of what is normal, what is acceptable. And then there are some on the fringe, like the killer of the guard at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., who use the content on the internet to justify the murders they commit. In the report of the task force that you have, you'll see that we've taken a unique approach. The task force is convinced that the way to actually reduce the appearance of online anti-Semitism is more through collaboration with the internet industry than confrontation. And that approach, as Robert will describe, already has yielded significant results. Look, the problem of cyber hate is pervasive, and the difficulty of responding to it is persistent, even with laws, even with prosecutions, even with anti-Semites in jail. Anti-Semitism is like killing cockroaches in your kitchen. You can stop one or two with legal action, but there are many, many more behind the wall that will not be affected by isolated prosecutions. That's simply a fact. And so rather than focusing on new laws and law enforcement, which have a role to play, but a limited role, the task force has developed recommendations for addressing online anti-Semitism and hate. And I want to review them with you briefly before turning it over to Robert. We urge internet companies that host content to create clear policies on hate speech and include them as part of their terms of service. The intermediaries' terms of service should clearly define what they will allow and not allow. And this isn't a question of legal restrictions on speech. It's a question of the intermediaries' own free speech rights to determine what goes online and what doesn't. We urge the internet hosts to create mechanisms for enforcing their hate speech policies. And it's not possible for websites or social networking services to filter all of the content that is posted. But the intermediaries should and have begun to put resources and mechanisms in place to monitor, respond to complaints about and to remove hate speech in a manner that preserves free expression and innovation, but which respects the terms of service that they have. We want Internet companies to establish a clear, user-friendly process for allowing users, those of us concerned about anti-Semitism online, to report hate speech where it shows up. And intermediaries should make it easy to use the collective efforts of us to identify and limit hate speech. They should have easy-to-find and easy-to-use reporting mechanisms that allow us to report hate speech that violates their terms of service. And they should have policies and procedures in place that allow for quick responses to the reports they receive. And to avoid criticism from free expression advocates and to achieve legitimacy, we want Internet hosts to increase transparency about terms of service enforcement decisions. This shouldn't be done in the dark. Intermediaries should provide users with information about how decisions are made with respect to the removal or the non-removal of anti-Semitism that violates the terms of service. When individual responses to complaints may be difficult, the intermediaries can increase transparency by publishing case studies or general examples of speech that has been deemed unacceptable under the terms of service. And we also think that the Internet companies should actively encourage counter-speech and encourage education to address hate speech. They have one of the biggest bully pulpits in the world, and they should use it. Intermediaries should not remain silent about anti-Semitism and hate. They can use their own corporate voice in press releases, advertisements that run next to the hate content, or elsewhere, to respond to the hate content they choose not to take down and to publicize the fact that they have taken down hate speech. And they should also empower users to counter hate speech by including explanations and counter speech where appropriate. We think it's critical that the Internet industry unite to confront the issue of hate speech, and that the intermediaries should build on the working group process Robert will describe in a moment, with the goal of meeting regularly to discuss and consult with each other and with experts on the issues they face in responding to anti-Semitism. Ideally, on a yearly basis, these intermediaries should meet in a meeting such as this to talk about how they are going to fight anti-Semitism side by side with us. We can give you numerous examples of how the approach we have taken has actually produced results, has reduced anti-Semitism online, and it, more importantly, has sensitized the biggest platform for Internet content in the world to understand that anti-Semitism is something that they must be concerned about, not just because it's repugnant, just because it's an affront to those who suffered the Holocaust and its memory, but because it actually affects people, their psyche, and often their physical well-being. So, Robert, with that, I think that's an appropriate setup to your discussion of how we've implemented these principles through the working group that's met now twice in California.
Is this on? Let me just start by saying one thing, which is a follow-up to what Chris just said. Everybody in this room is affected by Internet hate. Whether you're Israeli, whether you're Jewish, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, somewhere on the Internet there is hate content about you, about who you are or where you came from. It is a global, universal problem. It's not unique to any one particular group. Now, we've focused a lot of our time on anti-Semitism, but it is a global problem that affects everyone. The other starting point for us when we started to work...
You might pull the microphone just a little bit closer. Sorry.
The other starting point for when we started this work is we've mentioned a number of very large Internet platforms, Google, Facebook, Twitter. These are Internet companies that have hundreds and hundreds of millions of users. But the approach we took is that they're actually run by people. There are people who sit in offices in different parts, many of them in the United States, but around the world, that write these policies they make these decisions. And so our first approach was really to start to get to know the people that are actually making the decisions that we have a problem with, that we have criticism of. And when we started this almost 2 years ago, Google and Facebook were really the only ones at the table who actually wanted to come and talk to us. And we learned very early on that we had a lot of work to do, because they really didn't know a whole lot about anti-Semitism. They didn't really know a whole lot about Holocaust denial. They didn't know a lot about hate speech at all. So one of our number one jobs as part of this working group has been to educate them, has been to teach them. And I will tell you, it's a very reciprocal process, because in the course of, and some of us have spent time at Facebook, we've spent time at Twitter, we've learned from them too. They have taught, sometimes we are critical, and we base our assumptions on certain things that may or may not exist. The same is true for them. So one of the important components of our work in this area has been it's multi-stakeholder, as Chris mentioned. It started out very small, but as we started to gain some momentum, we actually have gotten calls from other technology companies who want to be a part of the discussion. And whereas many of us are focused only on some of the large ones, right? Facebook, Google, Twitter, or YouTube, the industry is very, very large. If you just think about, your phone that you're using, the person that, the company that actually provides the phone that may have a term of service that may allow for an anti-Semitic video to be viewed on your phone, or whether or not somebody is in their apartment and they decide to harass or target a child at school because they're Jewish, but they're also using a communication system to do that, and what is the role of the communication system? So in the United States, for example, Comcast is the largest provider of internet service in the United States. They have millions and millions of customers. And people use their service to target children for all sorts of reasons. And one of the things that we learned that they did was they've set up a whole education system. And they're very interested in having connections with us and with people around this table, because they have a common interest. They have a shared interest. Let me mention one of the other challenges of this, and that is that we need to be able to maintain the ability to be critical, because there are many disagreements. And those of us who have been we've had two very important meetings, one last year and one this year, one hosted by Google, one hosted by Facebook. And not everybody who sits around the table, including ADL and some of the other NGOs, agree. We do not agree with Facebook on their, for example, their definition of Holocaust, whether Holocaust denial fits within their definition of hate speech. But Facebook has a definition of hate speech. There are many other companies that are not even at the level of getting to a definition of hate speech. And so that's something that we need to work on. But one of the things that we made a priority of was, okay, if we disagree with their definition, if we disagree with their approach, then maybe the onus is on us to actually teach them.
Just on that point, Robert,
Okay.
There was a group created on Facebook. I'll stand up so people on the other side of the podium can see me. There was a group created on Facebook several years ago called the Third Intifada Group. We immediately called Facebook and said, you've got to take this down. This is a call for violence. Could result in violence. And the person at Facebook actually said, well, we just looked up the meaning of the word intifada and we don't have a problem with it. So about 2 days later, we went back to them and said, take a look at the content, some of it in Arabic, that is on that group. And they then said, we understand. And we've told the moderator of the group that the content has to come down. Of course, the moderator didn't take it down. Facebook then took it down. And so that's part of the education process that we're talking about.
There's other, in the internet session, working group session, one of the examples we talked, that was in some of the materials, is if you search the word Jew, and many of you may know this, you come up with anti-Semitic websites. And so There was actually an attempt to sort of get Google years ago to change their logarithm. This is not something that they were willing to do. This is a proprietary thing. This is basically their business model. They weren't about to change it. But what they were willing to do was to create almost like a sponsored ad that pops up when you do this search that gives you some basic background information. The Protocols Elders of Zion. We are not going to be able, probably no one in this room is going to be able to stop the sale of this publication. It's in multiple languages all over the world. In the United States, you can buy it on Amazon.com very, very easily. Have it shipped to your house in 24 hours. But Amazon, as a corporate entity, is actually willing to put information that we helped put out there, which is sort of our take, our editorial, our review, that this is actually an anti-Semitic book of lies. So that if you're going to buy it, you're actually going to get this particular message.
So likewise on YouTube, if there's certain content that doesn't violate the terms of service, but comes very close to the line, they will link the user to a hate response center that then links to the Anti-Defamation League with a description of what anti-Semitism is and how to respond to it.
So some of this is related to sort of developing the relationships. It's related to education. And it's related to coming up with creative ways. I mean, most of the people that we have been working with are adamantly, they don't want to be legislated. And I know, globally, there is not consistency in speech laws. So in the United States, for instance, where most of these companies are based, where their servers actually sit, they're free speech. They have a very free speech attitude towards it. But one of the things that we've learned, and some of this is actually reflected in the report, which is here, and there's a pile outside, is that the legal approach, creating criminal sanctions for speech, has not proven to be the most effective. And in some ways, it lets them off the hook. It lets a lot of people off the hook by saying, okay, well, a law has been passed, it's illegal, you can't do it. And we don't want to take the pressure off of them. Everyone in the room has a role to play. We're working on it from a working group standpoint. But as a community, we need to educate them. We need to be able to define what the standards are and to be able to keep the pressure on them. Because it's really their choice, They can decide how they want to do it. Twitter, for one other example, and I'll turn it back over to Chris. So many of you know that if you go online, it's very easy for you to report something. If you're on Facebook, there's usually a little button and you can click to report. Facebook gets millions of complaints every single day. But if you're on Twitter, and we have, we've been working with Twitter now for 2 years. If you're on Twitter, you can't do that. They have a help center. They have a special web page where you could actually file complaints. Their rules are very, very different. But one of the things that we're trying to encourage them is you need to be alongside industry standard. So most of the newspapers, most of the websites, it makes it easy. So creating a user-friendly experience from the perspective of all of you who may experience this type of content online is really important, and it's one of our recommendations.
And just on the point about Twitter, they've taken the position, they come to our meetings, but they take the position that their speech policy is coextensive with the First Amendment in the United States, which is very, very broad and allows a lot of anti-Semitic speech. We've tried to convince them that they ought to have speech policies similar to the other platforms. We're not there yet, but we did convince them that when they are the publisher of the content, they have some control and discretion. So, for example, for those of you who use Twitter, you may know there are leading tweets that get promoted by the company. So if you're a subscriber, they'll say, this is something that seems to be of great interest to a lot of people. They will not do that with things that are patently anti-Semitic or patently hate speech. That's progress. So we're making progress really one step at a time. I was remiss at the beginning for not thanking and welcoming Hage Elitzer, who is the Senior Director of Diaspora Affairs in the Ministry of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora, who made this panel possible. And thank you. I wanted to ask you if you have anything to say, add, question.
Thank you very much. We made this panel because we thought it's a very, very good example of how a working group can make an effect in the real world, and it's a good model, and this is, I think you are doing it very well. I don't want to interrupt. I just,
okay, well, I wanted to make sure we thank you for making this possible.
My pleasure.
And Fiamma, you had another point you wanted to make.
Well, I admire very much the work that you have been doing, because this is a work that will help identifying and then punishing anti-Semitism and racism online. But I want to share with you the experience that we had in the Italian Parliament while we were meeting, in all of these meetings that you can find registered here. What happened is that the anti-Semitic website started not attacking only the Jews, but all the parliament, and defined them sort of slaves of the Jewish lobby. It was very articulate the way they did it. They did it in a lot of different occasions. They were publishing pictures of myself, defining me the boss, the mafioso boss of the Jewish lobby in the parliament. The parliament is part of it, and whatsoever. Now, in the Italian legal code contains no specific laws punishing anti-Semitism, and our members of the commissions were terribly worried about them. Some of them asked even for police bodyguards, which, by the way, I have since a lot of years, because anti-Semitism is dangerous. For instance, the current law makes it possible to black out pedophilia sites, but not anti-Semitic sites. It's not possible. So we kept denouncing and denouncing the fact, and nothing came out, even if we have one of the best postal police, as it is called. Now, what happened now? It was shown to me today by Stefano Gatti of I don't know if he's here, but he's a very valuable researcher for the CTEC, which is the research center about anti-Semitism in Italy, that suddenly the police woke up, closed the centers that produce this kind of incitement. They closed the Nazi-fascist Facebook profile, which is called For Those Who Want to Reopen the Risiera. The Risiera of San Saba, you know that it was the concentration camp in Italy. It stayed there, and now the 16th of October 2012, they closed it. The 18th of April 2013, the DIGOS, that is the General Investigation and Special Operation Division, black out two websites in Italy that are part of the anti-Semitic network Holy War, the one that particularly persecuted us, together with the Stormfront Italia. Now, and then there is another one, Paolo Sizzi. So suddenly something happened. Why did it happen? It happened because I think that the political movement that raised against this, while it didn't work, even if there are the laws to stop it. I mean, you can enforce the current laws against racism, and you will do it. But you don't do it until you don't have the political and social strength that will help the police doing that. So I think that what you're doing now is not only defining when you can certainly recognize that this is an anti-Semitic and a racist attitude, but also you are indicating the way to be on the side of the law, which is not always the same thing, you know. So I think that the ICCA must push together in these two directions. On one side, raising movements, on the other side, indicating the legal ways. When you put these two things together, then you succeed. We closed 4 internet sites. It's true they will reopen in the United States, we know that. But in Europe, for instance, the Protocol of Budapest has been approved now by almost all of you know about that. The Protocol of Budapest is the only one that allows us to close in one place and not to reopen in another European place, which is already something. Still you can reopen in America or wherever else. But we are going into the direction that this problem is very well understood today.
So let me mention one other thing that we're going to take questions from the floor, and I'd like to get the panelists' reaction to this issue, which is one of anonymity. One of the things we found is that when people don't have to stand behind their ideas, when they won't be linked with the things that appear online, they tend to say really horrible things. The New York Times addressed this by giving prominence to the comments to news stories where people are willing to be identified first, and then the others fall down, way down on the page and never get read. Facebook has a policy of requiring people to use real names except on something they call pages. And you could be a sponsor of a page on a subject without being identified. And there was recently a page that had a despicable cartoon involving Anne Frank that I'm not going to describe for you. But what they did, which is really very clever, is go to the sponsor of that page and say, this may or may not be prohibited by our terms of service. We allow humor, and this appears to be humor, and we're having discussions with them about that too. But we would like to identify you as the sponsor of this page, and if you're not willing to be identified, we're going to take it down. And we were told that not only did that page come down, but in other instances just like it, 95% of the cases, the individuals say, never mind, I don't want to be identified with that speech. With that said, anonymous speech is an important political tool. It's used all the time to express very important opinions. So a balance needs to be struck, but this is something we also talked about briefly in the report. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that ADL's National Director, Abe Foxman, who you'll hear from tomorrow, and I have written a book called Viral Hate, containing its spread on the Internet. I should have brought a prop because I have a pre-copy. Robert has one. He's a good sales assistant here. Thank you. Here it is with a scorpion with a USB port as its tail, plugging into the Internet. It's not yet on sale, but it can be pre-ordered on Amazon. And we talk about a lot of the things that we're talking about here today. Now, sir, you've been patient. Let me recognize you for a question.
Thank you very much. Jerry Lewis from the UK. Members of Parliament, lawmakers, are in a very privileged position. They are entitled to ask questions of ministers. Members of the public don't always have that opportunity. There's one area which I think, and if I may suggest, it's something worth looking at. Thank you very much. There's something worth looking at, and that is there are extraordinary number of inter-parliamentary delegations crisscrossing the world on a continuous basis. There are also select committees from each of the parliaments going to various other parliaments. And more important, there are ministerial missions going to other countries. And I'm wondering what level of discussion you've had on the task force for drawing up guidance notes so that when MPs who are not necessarily part of the group are going to visit other countries or can get to a minister who's going to a country where anti-Semitism is prevalent, they can be briefed in advance, and then you can do the job in asking in your parliament follow-up questions of the minister and say, what was the result, what's been done, what can be done next. Similarly, if you hear a prime minister or a president is visiting a country where there's a problem, for example, Hungary or Norway or wherever, they ought to be briefed by representatives of the task force before they go. It's the tactics we used in Soviet Jewry very effectively. I'd like to know what, if any, efforts have been made in that direction. And can I just echo the tribute you paid to John Mann? He's done a brilliant job. Thank you.
I agree with that. And John, can you answer this question?
Yes, we do that. And I think that over time, as we develop our resource, we'll be able to publicise it better by putting some of these issues on the internet ourselves for people to see, but also for parliamentarians across different countries to be able to take information, advice, work others have done and use that so that we don't all attempt to learn the same lessons at the same time, but we can steal the good lessons from one another. So that is the next phase that we're moving into, of sharing best practice, and sharing knowledge base.
I would like to mention also the fact that the ICCA, together also with the EF5, which is the European Friends of Israel, and the ICJP, which is the international group of parliamentarians, of Jewish who are parliamentarians. It's worldwide. I'm the president of them. We went to Budapest, and we have a very tough, long trip where we met everybody there, just denouncing the terrible anti-Semitism that is there. I thought it was not just speaking. We went to each and every of them, to the ministers, to the members of parliament. We shared a lot of time with the Jewish community over there to show them our commitment. And we planned to continue with this kind of visits. I think this goes exactly in the direction of your question. We want to focus on the countries where there is the most outstanding, disgusting anti-Semitism, and to show them that we have a task force also against them with our bodies being there.
Excellent, thank you. I think there's a question here. Yes, ma'am. There's a microphone.
Oh, okay. May I ask Fiamma, because I'm so happy she's here and I used to read much of what she said. Can I ask you your opinion about Pope Francis? Will he be strong? Will he speak out? Or will he have to retreat like Pope Benedict XVI did after he asked about violence in the Islamic faith? That's one question. And the second question about the European Parliament. Is it able to deal country by country and analyze why there is increasing anti-Semitism? And is there able to be a resolution in each country that will be accepted?
Very briefly, about the Pope, it's too early to define his politics about anti-Semitism. The previous Pope made a very strong statement about the attitude of Muslims toward the other religions. You remember that? And then he was strongly attacked because of that. And now I think that there will be, the church is always very cautious about this kind of problems. But now that their people, the Christians all over the Muslim world, are under such a very heavy attack, they kill them, And then I hope that they will be able to raise their hand and say, stop with that. And I don't know how they could forget that there is anti-Semitism in this country too, not only anti-Christianity. So we will see if this is possible. And certainly what I can say is that the two things are linked. So if one will raise, also the other will come up. This is what I think. The second thing about the European Union is very, very complicated. It would require a full... I can only say that the reason why the European Union doesn't ask from... Well, the European Union has a definition of anti-Semitism. You know that. So it's not that it's completely absent from the subject. That they try to do something, and I've been in several meetings about that. But still there is there are very strong prejudice in the European Union about Israel, and this must never be hidden. The moment when they describe anti-Semitism, they are always very careful to repeat that there are legitimate critics about the state of Israel, something that nobody has doubts about it. But sometimes the critics that come out from the European Union are not legitimate at all. They just fantasize about what Israel is. And I think that their difficulties in fighting a real fight against anti-Semitism today is connected either to this weakness. It's a weak ideology what comes out today from the old, tired Europe, if you see what I mean. I'm trying to be very very quickly, even too much. And then there is also the other problem, which is a basic problem, and it is the one of the Muslim population. They don't want to offend, standing too strongly on the side of the Jews and accusing part of the population of Europe, which is made nowadays of many millions immigrants, of anti-Semitism. So there is a caution that probably must be discussed and reviewed.
We're going to take one more question and then we're going to conclude. But I want to thank members of our task force. I see one of them here, Paul Gianassi from the UK, who's been a terrific participant in all of our meetings, including traveling to California. Mike Wine, I think, may be here. If not, I want to thank him. And Jardana Land, who runs the office at the ICCA and is really the administrator. I assume she is here. I want to thank her for everything she's done. We have time for one more question, and then I think there's a Jerusalem tour and other things going on. Sir.
Just now, it's okay. I just wanted to ask whether the task force has been approached by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation with regard to some of the most recent resolutions that they have introduced in the United Nations, in particular Resolution 1618, which really is basically a reframing of the blasphemy laws. And what has the response been? I ask this because some of these resolutions now are being framed in such a way so that they are a lot more palatable to the Western ear. So I was wondering what the response has been by the task force.
That's for the ICCA at large rather than the task force, really. Fiamma, do you want to address that? What? The UN resolution.
The UN resolution about...
Resolution 1618, there have been a number of resolutions that have been proposed by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in order to, let's say, develop a whole response to criticism of Islam or Islamic figures, and they have been considered blasphemy laws, but in another form. So I was wondering what the response has been from the task force, if you've been approached by these organizations.
So that really isn't a task force issue, but we take the point for the ICCA and we'll certainly consider it. But I have one question for everyone here before we break. When you've seen anti-Semitism online, have you either responded by telling why it's a lie or reported it to the internet provider to report abuse? By show of hands, how many people have done either of those things? So in this group, it's about a third. So if you can only count on a third in this group, what does that say about the public at large? We have a lot of work to do, and we need your help. So part of the effort is when you see something, say something, does not just apply to bags in airports. Thank you very much. And thanks very much to the panelists.